Good morning. Point of information, if you're doing credit risk management in multiple countries around the world, the 5 words you need to know: good morning, hello, yes, no, toilette. You can operate across the board with any size company, any male or female, any executive of any order, so long as you smile, you present yourself with respect and dignity, and you use the magic words. Hello, how are you? This is a 30-minute session introducing 2 things, apples and oranges. I rely on the slides for 2 purposes. One is so that I cover the material I want to cover, because moving outside of this is very easily done, as you'll see in a second as I move outside. The other is we'll do 20 minutes of talking head. There'll be 10 minutes for Q&A. Understand that there is a much larger presentation with descriptions and definitions and further details about both programs, the IFRS 9 and the Basel Accords 1, 2, and 3. That'll be up on the website for you to look at. I try not to bore you too much. What we're going to start with is why we're having this conversation at all. And the banks have finally caught up to doing what you have been doing in your enterprises since day one. They're forced to identify risk in their systems, in their portfolios, ring a bell? And to do it in such a way that they can prepare for shocks in the economy and in the financial system. And if you need any more convincing about why that's happened, you can go back to '85 and look at the financial crisis that was caused by junk bonds. You can move forward into 2008. BCCI, you can move forward to 2010. We've got bankruptcies occurring all over the place, mergers. And there is the fallback position that we have looking at plain anti-money laundering and outright corruption. Wells Fargo Bank, if you want to do a case study, go work for Wells Fargo Bank for 3 months and then write the story. It is inherent in the human character to try and optimize personal value, but to do it at the expense of others is unacceptable in our society. So your job is to protect your company by assuring that your portfolio is risk measured and acceptable to the risk appetite of your company. Now we're forcing the banks to do it. So, having said that, the heart blood of your stakeholder value is capital. Your suppliers need it to provide you with the raw materials and products that you require in order to conduct your trade. You need it so that you can fund your operations, and you need it at a cost-effective rate. Banks are in a position to provide capital if they are properly regulated and have the liquidity that makes capital available to you at a reasonable price on demand in order that you can conduct business in the marketplace. Every element of your chain of operation in your business is responsive to the bank's, your bank's ability to service your needs and the banking system's ability, the entire global banking system's ability to remain stable in the event of economic or financial shock. Now we're going to start with the most fundamental description of 2 mechanisms. One is a methodology for selecting, compiling, and classifying financial information. You will see it most often in the company's primary marketing tool, commonly called the annual report. It identifies the strategy of the company. You can identify risk in that process as they measure what they had intended to do, what was their strategy, and whether they were able to achieve the objectives identified. As an aside, we're talking about its effect on markets. When you have a company that fails to achieve either its earnings target or its whisper price revenue target, what happens? What happens to a company that is listed at a particular stock price who fails to achieve the targets that the market expects, that the analysts have indicated they would be looking for? What happens? What happens to the stock price? It tanks. Why? Because markets are sensitive to the next step. Markets don't measure now or yesterday. They measure tomorrow. If you have predicted you would achieve a certain result and you fail to achieve it, it means that the target has shifted. They've compensated for your achievement in advance by your stock price. You fail to achieve it, you don't merit the price that the market has set for you. Therefore, your stock price drops. All right? The cause of that, in many instances, is the improper use of the resources that have been allocated to your firm. And the big one is capital. The two things we're going to talk about today affect your ability to access and your ability to access capital and your ability to access that capital at a reasonable cost. And why do you even care? What happens if 2/3 of your base of customers suddenly experiences a 30% increase in cost of capital? Wow. Do your payments accelerate? Do you believe you're going to collect faster? You can sell more? It slows down the entire infrastructure. So you care about where the banking network is relative to your customer base and to you. If you're going to do an acquisition, or if you intend to do a merger, and you have locked down capital at a specific rate, and there is a significant shock that hits the market, you will not execute that merger or acquisition. It will affect your customer base. It will affect your collectability of the outstanding invoices. So the reason is not that you need to understand the essential elements to the extent that it's going to enable you to do your job or not. But in order to ultimately be successful, you should understand if there is something in the banking network, if there is something in the financial accounting network that changes, you need to be abreast of it. IFRS 9 is, as indicated, it's an element that was pronounced by the International Accounting Standards Board, very prevalent in most of the world. All right? It is a, I'm going brain dead here. It is a principles-based function. The whole process by which the standards in the IASB world are measured are on the basis of achieving a specific objective. How you get there is a function that is measurable and acceptable to the principles in the IASB, measured and guided by IFRS regulatory pronouncements, but you're pretty much left to identifying your methodology to get to the ultimate objective, which is a consistently applied set of standards that, when properly compiled, collated, and released, will give you a mechanism to measure the value and viability of a business enterprise. Now, spoken very simply, it means the financial statements that you're looking at are credible, understandable, and recognizable on a pattern that you have adopted over time. All right. Now, IASB financial statements prepared according to IFRS, have been in the market now for over a decade and studied worldwide for universal adoption, even by the Americans. All right, why is there so much hassle about the two systems? Now, GAAP, which is a Financial Accounting Standards Board mechanism in the United States, basically recognizes certain features of financial accounting differently, but they're moving towards a consolidation of the rules that GAAP plays by and enabling companies worldwide listed on the stock market to list according to the IFRS rules. How will that change your life? Anybody care to render an opinion on what happens when a company shifts from IFRS, well, from GAAP to IFRS? Is it a critical event in the world? Does the ground open up and swallow your business enterprise? Not at all. But if you have compiled a history of a client for 5 years, according to GAAP, and suddenly on the 6th year, at the end of the fiscal year for your annual review, you're reviewing this according to IFRS, the delta in the earnings calculation, the delta in the expense calculation, whether it's depreciated across time or taken in the instant wherein the expense is incurred, makes a difference in how the numbers will flow, the ratios will flow. In other words, it affects your ability to determine that the condition of the company today is equal to or better than the condition that it was last year, and on a trend basis for 3 years in a row. So really, from a financial accounting standards standpoint, this is what you need to understand. And you need to know, one of the takeaways from today's session is you need to know what measurement, what methodology is being used to give that document to you. And you need to question up. Get to your chief accounting officer if you have to. I don't understand why this gap now exists. You know, last month the ratio was 5-to-1. This month the ratio is 4-to-1. But earnings seem to be down. I don't understand. What methodology are you measuring? Well, now we're measuring IFRS. Okay, here's what you have to consider: the changes in the structuring of the outcome of the numbers. All right, key point, you need to know to ask the question and to review it on that basis. And they'll state for you, quite frankly, even in the quarterly financial statements, what we would consider to be our 10Qs, or the annual, which is the 10K, they tell you at the front end the methodology used, and specifically for that purpose. And by the way, don't fail to read the notes. If the change in the financial condition of the company as it is released to stakeholders is materially different than the prior period, there'll be notes on it, and they'll explain to you precisely what occurred. You know, there was no change in business operations. There was no change in substance of the company. The only change that occurs was the classification methodology, and that resulted in this, this, and this. So your job now is to recognize that last month to this month, that was the delta. The change occurred, and this was its effect on the numbers. Going forward, there will not be that change. So the number that you measure this quarter against next quarter, against the next quarter, will be totally according to IFRS, and you'll learn that methodology quickly. But if you don't consider it, you may start a ball rolling with regards to an evaluation of a particular customer that will be embarrassing for you, because in point of fact, they may very well have experienced an improved condition as a result of the shift. The other thing that GAAP requires, that the U.S. Financial Standards Boards require, is that if you're going to list on our exchanges, heretofore you listed it with GAAP or you didn't get listed. So everybody is sitting in the back room restructuring IASB to GAAP, or IFRS to GAAP. But the reality today is they accept IFRS methodology reported financial statements. So with regards to the handles, IFRS 9 being the most recent pronouncement, and Basel III, their only similarity is their objective in maintaining a methodology and a condition that allows for proper valuation and representation on the financial statement side of a business entity, all right? Which is good news, fairly simple to understand. Basel is a set of accords that have been now in place for almost 20 years. As a matter of fact, they structured it very near my hometown in New Hampshire. These financial types like to go to neat places when they have to think. It's like they can't think or have a drink if they're in their office. They've got to go to New Hampshire in the White Mountains, and then they can think about it. And by the way, virtually nothing happened for the first 5 years. The initiation of what would have been Basel I, which essentially was called the Basel Accords, was a bunch of financials guys sitting around the room going, geez, you know, what would happen if all hell broke loose and we had a shock in the economy or the financial markets? And lo and behold, what happened? There was a huge shock in the financial markets. You know, junk bonds, subprime mortgages, remember that one? Wasn't that a lot of fun? What happens to money? Dries up. And what's there gets rated off at an interest rate that would crush you. It impairs your ability to conduct trade. All right. Mergers and acquisitions don't get made. Business doesn't move forward. Worse, investment doesn't get made. If investment doesn't get made, your sales suffer. So the Bank of International Settlements, let's do an aside on that. Who is completely aware of who this ghost entity is called the Bank of International Settlements? Who can tell me where it resides? What's the name of the accord? All together. Basel? Come on. It's almost lunchtime. I know I'm the last guy on the docket before you go eat, but work with me here. When you have to know this, it's going to be crushing. Basel, Switzerland is the home of the Bank of International Settlements. And these crazy guys do one thing and one thing alone. They are the bank of focus for all of the settlements, for all of the central banks for the world. Everything goes through them. They get to see what's happening, what the liquidity is, where they're having problems. All of that went through the Bank of International Settlement. So they assigned a committee within BIS to come up with the accords. Find a way to fix this problem. You know, the smartest minds of the world are all located in BIS and its related central banks. There has to be a methodology that would allow them to address in advance the probability of occurrence of a banking shock. Great. So they get together and they float Basel II. Now, the impact of Basel II on the market, on banks in the market, was really severe. I had a bunch of friends from Crédit Lyonnais that wanted to jump out the window. What they did was, banks going back 600 or 700 years with data accordingly, and controlling account risk on the basis of a single name, with all of the product lined up underneath that name and a number underneath. So, Baron de Rothschild, what do you figure, 2.6 trillion euro? Okay, that's the relationship with the bank. Well, is it risky? Oh, this is Rothschild. Well, what's contained in the portfolio? Ring a bell with you? What is contained in the portfolio that the bank holds on that customer? And they didn't know. And that's what gave rise to a higher probability of occurrence of a default or a problem in the fact that they did not know. So what they did was they took that customer and all of the products and flipped it on its side and measured each of them according to the proper allocation of risk management techniques to determine probability of default and extent of commitment to that customer in that product as it related to that product across all customers in the bank. And that's where everything broke loose. The banks went to the insurance companies and said, you guys do this all the time by customer, by product. Can you explain how to do it? So they came up with models. They moved the models over, and they gave them 5 years to come up with two things. One, a model that they would acquire that appropriately assesses and reports risk in their portfolio, sufficiently identified to allow them to maintain capital availability for depositors to pull capital and for businesses to grow. So this is a very good thing. And it has taken them that long to work with these models. And a lot of banks have now designed their own. And quite a few of the banks have very substantial models that really work well from a statistical standpoint. Okay, now comes the next stage. The banks are standing up saying, yep, we've got it, no problem. We've got our risk hedged. These are the amounts of reserves we have for these particular products based on this criteria and this outcome. And BIS turns around and says, gee, that's wonderful, but the public needs to understand. There needs to be transparency in this process. How do we know the outcome is being measured in such a way that it matches the actual risk experienced by the portfolio? And again, you don't need to know this to do your jobs. What you need to know is, if this modeling works, they will have reserves sufficient to protect the portfolio from shocks which cause you to experience either an increased cost of capital or a lack of availability of capital, which is the worst of all worlds. Now, why do I explain this to you? See, this is why I always put my slides up on the board. We haven't moved from this one because it's an easier story to tell if I just engage with you and inform you. All right, why do we worry about the capital aspect? Okay, every company, SME, maybe not necessarily in writing, but certainly in mental structure, identifies its capitalization strategy. Where are you going to get the money to run your business? What is singularly the largest classification of item that drives the business's ability to use internal capital to fund its ventures? Where does the company get its money to run? Why are you here? Your portfolios generate what? It comes from you. Invoice conversion is the single largest contributor to the capitalization that the company has. And to the extent you are near optimum, you actually reduce the requirement for capital from other sources in the ordinary course. Now, if you're growing, you're expanding, you want to acquire, you need more money, we add another feature to the capitalization structure. Your Treasury Department does this. If you sit down with your treasurer and you say, show me the capitalization structure, he'll show you a page. It'll have a box on it. That box will contain percentage and estimated value of income from that quarter. So invoices, X amount, 40%, 50%, maybe 60% of your portfolio, that falls right on your back. Because to the extent that you have a past due, you deny the company access to that capital, and they've got to replace it if their capital strategy calls for something to fill the gap. What do they use? Just speak up. Don't worry about a mic. Just yell it out.
They call on the shareholders.
What?
Call on the shareholders.
Sell stock. Get shareholders to buy stock. That's a good one. Equities. That's a piece. Not a large piece. Well, unless you're Uber. But the reality, God, yeah. maybe Uber is an exception I shouldn't have brought up. The cash side of Uber is really bad. So the equity side would be very important. What else? How else do you fund your organization? Absolutely. Short-term and long-term debt, significant, upwards of 20 to 25%. All right. Something else that you may not have encountered yet, but will. You get into a company and you've established a short-term, long-term debts, even medium-term, mezzanine financing and whatever, and long-term debt, but you are restricted either by your charter, by your board of directors, or by your banking availability to fund that amount of debt. What else do you use?
Some assets.
Oh, bad news. Don't listen to this guy. He's going to be tending lights the rest of his life. Stick with me on this one. Okay. What's a derivative? Nasty language. Terrible vocabulary. Have you?
You're selling your debts to someone else.
All right. You're out from doing the camera thing the rest of your life. A debenture, a derivative, is a product that will generate cash for the company and can be scheduled into your capitalization strategy. It is another mechanism for you to bring cash into the company. Now, some derivatives fall right back on your portfolio. Have you ever heard of a credit default swap? You're actually taking your pool of customers. You are packaging those customers in such a way that there is a probability of recovery from that customer base that would encourage a second party, someone in the secondary level, to purchase that for a price. You continue to administer the actual receivable, and to the extent your receivable satisfies the objectives of the package, you are in a very good place to receive front-end cash, discounted, yet even the discount is compensatable in a comparison to the debt amount that you pay in interest. All right, so that's your capitalization strategy. Anything that impairs that causes the company to have its own stress. And it's your job to maximize the invoice conversion in whatever way you have to, collecting the money, resolving the discrepancies through reconciliation, whatever way is necessary. You get help from the banking community in doing that to the extent there is any potential downgrade in your access to that capital, in your supplier's access to that capital, in your bank's availability to loan that capital affects your ability to do your job optimally. And the reason we talk about Basel is because the third phase, the transparency phase, means that those models and that detail is now going to be readily available to the Bank of International Settlements at a minimum, and the reserve boards of the different parts of the world selectively as required for review. But the banks are going to have to prove that they did indeed hedge the risk associated with their portfolios. They're going to get smarter at it. The level of corruption should decline significantly. That word transparency scares the crap out of bankers, as you well know. Remember the numbered Swiss bank account with no accountability? Gone forever. Even the private banks are having to tear into it. Now, secondary to these very mundane, transparent regulations and policies is an underlying concept. And that is the reason we teach you portfolio management. You set your customers in a portfolio. You use the Pareto theory. 80% of your business occurs through 20% of your customers. If you properly manage those 20%, you know what condition they're in. You manage the financial statements, which you now need to be able to define which methodology for what period of time, so you can be comfortable with the new methodology. All right, 2019, IFRS 9 goes in. Basel III should be in full force, so you can look forward to having a relative period of stability, unless we foolishly initiate another shock, economic or financial, in the meantime. But understand, in the Socratic sense, know your customers, not only because KY, know your customer methodology and AML requires it, but know them because they are your key to success. You deal with the 80% contribution, the 20% is beneath it, but you'll find the numbers are not significantly greater. Know that pyramid, at least by the top half, intimately. Work with the sales organization to engage and know it, and be able to deal with it in the event that something occurs at the customer level. And that engagement is your key to success, not only in the company you're in, but wherever you go. Any general questions about this? If you've got detailed questions, you can hit the website at your convenience. It's better to do it in pajamas. If you have a question after that, send me an email. Everybody good? Super. It was a pleasure speaking to you over these last 3 days. I hope you enjoyed yourself.